My name is Eric Skrozinski, and you're listening to episode number 14 of Gut Reactions. Hey everybody, welcome to our second episode of the Summer of Fear series. On this episode, I'm going to be talking about Wes Craven's 1977 film, The Hills Have Eyes, and its remake by Alexandre of the same name. Now, while I don't go out of my way to just spoil movies, I am going to be talking pretty freely about them, so spoilers may show up here and there. If you have an issue with that, I highly recommend you go in and watch Wes Craven's Hills Have Eyes and Alexandre Aja's remake of the same name, so that way you can listen to this episode with no fear whatsoever. Well, at least not the bad kind of fear.
To avoid fainting, keep repeating.
It's only a movie. Only a movie. Only a movie.
Take as much as you can.
Only a movie.
Few directors in film history slashed their way onto the scene quite like Wes Craven. His early films were not critically acclaimed red carpet fare. They instead were met with screams and moral outcry. Wes Craven launched his directing career with the controversial rape revenge film entitled Last House on the Left, a film that New York Times reporter Howard Thompson called, quote, sickening tripe, filled with, quote, repulsive people and human behavior. Craven recalled that when the film first ran in the U.S., people actually rushed to the projection booths trying to get to the print and destroy it. Theater owners were bodily threatened, there was a fistfight in one theater, a heart attack in another, and reports of grown men weeping. The film was also, like many films of the time, banned from cinemas in the UK by British censors for being, quote, unacceptable both in terms of our published guidelines and in terms of public expectations, end quote. Last House affected Wes Craven's personal life as well. The family he'd grown up with was crushed. His friends and colleagues were, in large part, disgusted by the film. Wes recalled in an interview that people would no longer leave their children with him or would end a conversation and leave the room immediately when they found out he directed that film. There was a strong sense of separation that was felt between Wes Craven and normal society. He attempted to get 6 or 7 films off the ground, including comedies, romantic films, and a war film, but no producer would back him. The ones that did offer money were only interested in one thing: another horror movie. After hitting financial bottom once the money from Last House on the Left and the adult film he made the year after ran out, Wes Craven finally listened to his friend and producer Peter Locke, whose promptings pushed Wes to go to California and write and direct his next feature film, The Hills Have Eyes. On this episode, I'll be talking about his fascinating film, as well as the 2006 remake of the same name. But first, it's time to talk about what I've been watching lately. So if you actually follow the podcast, you've seen both on YouTube or iTunes or Spotify or wherever you consume this content, you've seen my review for Leigh Whannell's 2018 film Upgrade. Now, I'm not going to really spend much time talking about it here because you can listen to a longer version there, but long story short, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic. I thought Leigh Whannell proved himself to be a very competent director, and the movie just really worked for me. I'd encourage you to check out my review there. Now, the only other thing I had a chance to watch before this episode was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2003. Now, I've talked about this film before and how much I really enjoy it, but seeing this version just a week after watching the original film screened in LA by Friday Night Frights, it really made the flaws shine a little bit more here. 1974 is just, that version is perfect, and so going to the remake, there were a couple things that stood out. The one thing that hasn't really changed was Arlie Ermey. He gives a 5-star performance and really carries this movie and the 2006 prequel to the remake, Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning. Really enjoy the movie still, but watching it so close in proximity to the original 1974 classic really puts things into perspective. Now, in addition to watching some cool stuff, I actually purchased 2 really cool items as well from Scream Factory. One would be Drag Me to Hell, and that's Sam Raimi's horror film he directed right after the Spider-Man franchise. I picked that up on Blu-ray from Scream Factory. It looks amazing. It's an awesome transfer and some beautiful cover art. And I also pre-ordered a little something. It was funny. I was defending Texas Chainsaw Massacre for The Next Generation, and literally that night, Scream Factory announced that they're going to be releasing that film on Blu-ray. So I'm not ashamed to say I pre-ordered Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Next Generation, and it will be arriving at my house in September it can't come soon enough. And the other thing that I watched was, of course, Wes Craven's 1977 film, The Hills Have Eyes.
They wanted to see something different, but something different saw them first. The hills have eyes.
It actually been a long time since I've seen The Hills Have Eyes. I think it's probably been about 5 years since I watched the original. I watched the remake just a few months ago. But yeah, it was really interesting. I caught it on Shudder and really went into it with memories of liking it and enjoying it, but with a lot more fondness for the remake. But going in, there were a couple things that I really noticed. One, I didn't realize that there was any reference to the bomb testing site in this one. I thought that was a totally unique thing to the remake. But they actually have a whole sequence where they're seeing the planes fly overhead in this one. So I never realized that before. And then also, I never realized that Dee Wallace was in this. Now, Dee Wallace has been in a fair share of horror movies, including, of course, her stellar performance in Cujo, which she should have gotten an Academy Award for, in my opinion. But I didn't know she was in this. She looks absolutely beautiful. She's about, I think, 29 here or 30. And she's really great in the movie. And also, I just really noticed a couple things that Wes Craven did that just showed a lot of maturity as a filmmaker from an early period of his life. But before I talk more and just ramble on about the movie, I basically want to answer 3 basic questions about both this movie and Alexandre Aja's stellar 2006 remake of the same name.
What are we doing?
We walk.
The road dead ends. It's not a shortcut, it's just desert.
Something's going on. They're like people or something living in those hills.
It's breakfast time.
Why are you doing this? You hear me?
Well, your dad wanted to see the desert. I hope he's enjoying himself.
Now, the first I want to answer is what qualifies them as summer movies. Now, I think the answer for this one is very, very, very obvious. You have your all-American family on their road trip through the desert, the kind of road trip we have all been on, especially if you're a native of Southern California. You've taken that long drive to New Mexico or Arizona or across country to Texas or wherever. And the fear when you're going through these wide stretches of lane where you only see a car every other hour or so is, you know, what if we break down? What if we ran out of gas? What lives in this wide stretch of desert? And I think Wes Craven plays on that fear so beautifully with The Hills Have Eyes. The streaming service Shudder actually has a collection of movies that's called Sunscorched. In that collection, I believe they have Hills Have Eyes, and that really describes The Hills Have Eyes. You can see the ripples of heat coming off the pavement and off the desert sand. You can see the sweat and the grime of people being stuck in this kind of, you know, horrible environment. And so I think the fact that it's such a, you know, you can almost feel the heat coming off the screen in this movie really makes it a good movie to watch in the summertime, because if it's anything like California, you're roasting this time of year, starting in May and going all the way through, even November if you have a really bad year. But yeah, so I think what qualifies both the original and the remake is just that the overexposed landscapes, the heat coming off the pavement, the all-American family on a road trip. You have the alpha male father. You have kind of the liberal son that's kind of stuck with the more conservative family, and he ends up having to grapple with some of his moral standards when it comes down to an actual life or death situation. And I think at their heart, they really are your typical American family just facing something you don't expect to face on something as fun and trivial as a family vacation. The next question I want to answer is what makes them great? And this question is very broad. I think the reason The Hills Have Eyes endures as a classic is just by how far Wes Craven really pushed this movie. This was about 3 years after Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and it's so brutal. he references the fact in a lot of interviews since making the movie, he referenced the fact that he was a huge fan of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I think the influences there are really clear. I think the closest parallel to The Hills Have Eyes would be the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and vice versa. I think the reason it's really great is just because it doesn't feel, maybe not as much as Texas Chainsaw, but in Hills Have Eyes, it doesn't feel like someone came up with this idea. It just, the way it plays out, it's just you're with this family that have bizarre, horrible things happening to them. And it really just feels like a documentary of sorts. And again, it has that grimy 16 millimeter aesthetic that made Texas Chainsaw Massacre so impactful. But seeing these bizarre things that you don't expect to see, like I said, on Family Vacation, and, you know, with this being the introduction of Michael Berryman, who has such a rare genetic disorder that makes him look so different. And you know it's not makeup. It looks too real for that. But you just don't know. Your brain, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just doesn't know how to comprehend what's going on. Now, the 2006 version is a lot more polished. So what makes that movie great isn't the same thing. What makes that movie great is you have some great effects by Greg Nicotero and company at KMB. You have some incredible cinematography. You have Alexandre Aja's direction. So you have these very interesting homages to Wes Craven's original, but you never sacrifice at the root what this movie is supposed to be. You have that same frenetic, extremist violence that you saw in like one of Aja's earlier works, like High Tension. But overall, he's very faithful to Wes Craven's film. And that's one thing that actually surprised me is I kind of had in my mind that The Hills Have Eyes 2006 remake was this very brutal, gory film, which it is. But I had the idea that Wes Craven's was a little bit tamer, but that's really not the case. Wes Craven's version is excessively violent. It may not be as gory as Aja's by a long stretch, but the actual frightening moments, the moments that are effective in both films, are there in Wes Craven's original film. You have the rape scene, which is very non-explicit in both versions. There's no nudity. There is a brief facial reaction to what's going on. And, I think both directors show incredible restraint in cutting away, but you realize in these quick flash frames of what's happening, just how brutal these attackers are. And there's lots of moments like that. Moments that cut away from the gore, moments that cut away from, you know, something that would be truly horrifying, and your brain fills in the blank with these horrifying things that, if put on screen, would have felt exploitative in a way that wouldn't have really elevated this movie. But yeah, Wes Craven's version has a lot of really interesting violent moments. You have the slaughter of an animal, which is a pretty taboo thing to do, even more than killing humans in a horror movie. To kill an animal as your first victim is a real shock. And then little moments. There's creative flourishes that Wes Craven did that, I think weren't matched by Aja. The moment where the father is burned alive and you see him tied up, and in Aja's version, you have his eyes melting and these great effects, and the Steadicam shot that's sped up through the desert going out to the explosion, and his skin literally melting off his body, and very elaborate effect. In Wes Craven's, he looks burned, but he dies more of asphyxiation. And there's this wonderful shot that I've never noticed before in watching it, or at least don't remember ever seeing, and it's where the dad's laying on the ground and he's giving his last breaths, and the camera will cut to the family and the wife saying, "That's not my husband, that's not my husband." And then it'll cut back to him, and you just see him, every time he breathes, these puffs of smoke come out of his mouth. And the idea that his lungs literally were burning from the inside out is a really interesting visual moment. What also makes them great, and I think Aja's more in this direction, is there's a lot of social commentary that takes place. Like I said, you have a family dynamic where you have, a liberal son-in-law with a conservative father, this ex law enforcement official, and you have the son not wanting to handle a weapon. You have just kind of these cliches, but by the end of the movie, you literally have him, in the face of danger, picking up literally an American flag, running across the room as patriotic music plays in the background, and he impales one of the mutants in the head with an American flag. And moments like that, you're wondering, okay, this is a huge shift for his character. I don't think Aja says whether it's good or bad, but I think he loves the irony of when push comes to shove, we reduce ourselves to these kind of animalistic instincts, whether or not they're contrary to everything we built ourselves up to believe in. And then finally, I think they're just so good at being terrifying. Wes Craven's film, especially, I think, with Pluto and with Jupiter, played brilliantly by James Whitworth. And by the way, his makeup is disgusting. I love the split nose effect. It's so sickening to me. It looks like a hot dog that's been microwaved a little bit too long. But they're so good at playing these really just dirty, creepy cannibals. And I think their characters are really interesting. That carries through in the 2006 as well. But I just was really captivated in rewatching the 1970s version. And then finally, which one is better? Now, this is a question I would have easily answered Alexandre Aja's 2006 The Hills Have Eyes. But having rewatched Wes Craven's 1977, it's really close. It's not easy for me to so quickly say Alexandre Aja's. I might have to actually give the edge to Wes Craven's original. There's just something about it, and maybe if I was to rewatch them both in a few months, I'll have a different answer, but both are masterful films. But Wes Craven's, I have to give credit for just going there first. It's kind of like Hitchcock's Psycho. Have slasher movies been done more since then? Yeah, but you have to give respect to the granddaddy of all things. That's the same reason I have a hard time picking a favorite zombie movie, because Night of the Living Dead is just so unique and revolutionary for its time period. And so to say, oh, this movie's better than the other just feels like sacrilege. No, I really enjoyed Wes Craven's. If you've only seen the remake recently, I encourage you, get a Shudder subscription. I'm not paid to say that, but I'm really recommending it because I'm on Shudder all the time. And go on there and watch Wes Craven's original. It is a wonderful, wonderful movie, and one that I'll probably start revisiting more and more. It's an excellent, excellent film. I just have to go with that one. So yeah, that's just my brief thoughts on our first movie of our Summer of Fear series, The Hills Have Eyes. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so be sure to comment on Instagram and Facebook and share your opinions on The Hills Have Eyes, both the remake and Wes Craven's film. If you want to leave comments about The Hills Have Eyes too, go ahead, I guess. Yeah, pretty rough. No, as far as next week goes, I do want to keep up this Summer of Fear thing. So I'm going to be talking about I Know What You Did Last Summer. It's going to be a first-time viewing, or at least first-time complete viewing for me. I'm really excited to go into that. I want to give a special shout-out to this caller that recommended it.
Hey, Eric. Love your show. This is Dale Thornton from California. When I think of summer horror movies, I always think of one of the first ones I watched as a kid, I Know What You Did Last Summer. I mean, it's in the title. We were actually staying in a beach house in Mexico when me and my sisters watched that. I was like 9 at the time, and I had to sleep in this room by myself that had wide picture windows looking out over the beach where literally no one was around. And just the whole night, I just sat there freaked out that that guy was going to come in and just murder me and my family. But whenever I think about summer movies, that's what comes to mind. I Know What You Did Last Summer.
All right, so there you have it, folks. Be sure to call in if you have any thoughts or suggestions about upcoming movies I should cover, and also if you have comments about I Know What You Did Last Summer or The Hills Have Eyes. I would really love to hear your thoughts. The number is 805-930-9594. That's 805-930-9594. Just wait for the answering machine to pick up and leave a message talking about your favorite summer horror movie, your thoughts on The Hills Have Eyes, and give me some thoughts about I Know What You Did Last Summer. I'm really excited to hear you guys call in. All right, well, that's all the time I have for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, be sure to leave a 5-star review on iTunes and tell your friends. Join in the Get Reactions Facebook group, get engaged on social media, all that fun stuff. I look forward to continuing our series next week with I Know What You Did Last Summer.